On the outskirts of a small town in Ohio, where factories once hummed and dreams once felt certain, lived a man named Alex. His house stood near an abandoned steel plant, its broken windows staring back at the world like tired eyes. Alex had grown up believing that if you worked hard in America, life would meet you halfway. For a while, it did. He graduated from a local high school, got a steady job at the plant, married his college sweetheart, and bought a modest home with a white porch and a swing that creaked in the evenings. On Sundays, neighbors waved. On Fridays, laughter filled the house. Then the plant shut down. At first, Alex believed it was temporary, a few months, maybe a year. He tightened his belt, picked up extra shifts where he could, and told his wife, Laura, that everything would be fine. But months turned into years. Job interviews ended with polite smiles and no calls back. Savings dried up quietly, like a river in summer. Laura passed away after a sudden illness, leaving behind silence that felt heavier than debt. The porch swing stopped moving. The house stopped feeling like home. Alex was 43 when he found himself standing in a food pantry line for the first time in his life. That night, sitting alone at the kitchen table, he stared at his hands, hands that once built things, fixed things, provided things. Now they shook slightly, not from age, but from doubt. "What am I worth if I can't provide?" he whispered into the empty room. Winter came early that year. Snow covered the streets, and with it came a kind of loneliness that only small American towns understand, the kind where everyone knows your story, but no one knows your pain. One evening, while walking home from a temporary night shift at a gas station, Ethan noticed a flickering light in the old public library. Curious, he stepped inside. A handwritten sign on the door read, "Free evening classes, skills for a new start." Inside, a handful of people sat around folding tables, a former waitress, a retired veteran, a young immigrant mother, and a man who had once been an accountant. At the front stood a woman named Mrs. Alvarez, a community volunteer with kind eyes and a steady voice. "Welcome," she said. "This isn't about where you failed. It's about where you're willing to begin again." Something in her words stayed with Alex. He came back the next night, and the next. He learned basic computer skills, then logistics software, then supply chain management, fields he'd never imagined himself in. It wasn't easy. Some nights, exhaustion nearly broke him. Other nights, grief did. But he stayed.
One evening after class, Mrs. Alvarez handed Ethan a flyer. "There's a job opening in Columbus," she said. "Entry level. It's a start." Columbus was 2 hours away. Alex didn't own a car anymore, but he took the flyer home and taped it above the sink. A start. The interview was brief and awkward. His suit was outdated, his resume thin with recent gaps. The hiring manager looked at him carefully and asked, "Why should we take a chance on you?" Alex paused. "Because I'm still standing," he said quietly, "and I haven't stopped learning." A week later, the call came. The job didn't make him rich. The apartment he rented was small, but every morning Alex woke up with purpose again. He rode the bus, he worked hard, he asked questions, he showed up early and stayed honest. Months passed. One spring afternoon, Alex stood on a pedestrian bridge overlooking the Scioto River. The water moved forward no matter what it left behind. He realized then that his life hadn't ended when he lost everything. It had narrowed, reshaped, and redirected. America hadn't promised him an easy life. It had given him something harder and more meaningful, the chance to begin again. Years later, Alex returned to his hometown, not to stay, but to speak at the same library where his second life had begun.
He stood at the front of the room, looking at faces filled with the same fear he once carried. "I thought losing everything meant I was finished," he said, "but it taught me something important." He paused, voice steady. "Rock bottom isn't the end, it's the ground you build from." As the room filled with quiet understanding, Alex felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt whole. Sometimes the American dream doesn't come true the way we imagine. Sometimes it breaks us first, so we can rebuild ourselves stronger. And sometimes the long way home is the one that finally teaches us who we are.